I woke up to the rustle of paper and the low hum of silence that felt louder than any alarm. The kitchen light was on. I hadn't left it that way. My bare feet hit the cold tile floor, and as I rounded the corner, I saw Claire standing in the hallway, arms folded, expression unreadable. On the table sat a manila envelope, opened, its contents laid out in perfect order, divorce papers. Served by her attorney apparently while I was still asleep upstairs. I looked at her waiting for anything, anger, regret, an explanation, but all she said was, "Sign them." 15 years. Just like that. I stared at the papers, unable to move for a few seconds, my fingers twitching at my sides. No conversation. No fight. No affair that I knew of. Nothing. Just paperwork and that flat, emotionless command. I managed to ask, why? But she didn't answer. She just stepped back into the shadow of the hallway like she couldn't bear to watch anymore. I didn't sign them, not right then. I read every word instead, even though my vision blurred halfway through. Claire. Well, Claire's attorney was thorough. The house was never really ours, it seemed. Her father's money had bought it. That made it hers. Every room I painted, every floor I replaced, every hour of overtime I worked to help keep it afloat while she pursued her art and her wine-soaked weekends, it didn't matter. I was being erased from it all. The trust fund her family used to purchase the house made it legally untouchable. I was being evicted from my own life with 72 hours to disappear. I walked upstairs like a stranger in my own home. Our bedroom, still warm from where she had slept beside me just hours before, suddenly looked like a museum exhibit. I opened drawers mechanically, grabbing only what was mine. My clothes, a couple of tools, my passport, my grandfather's watch. Everything else, furniture, electronics, the little espresso machine I bought her last Christmas, belonged to her now, or so the paper said. There was no fight, no shouting. That's what made it worse. Claire didn't cry. She didn't flinch. Just watched from the shadows while her lawyer's words spoke for her. I should have seen it coming, maybe. She'd been distant, colder. But I figured it was work, stress, life. Not this. Not a legal ambush over coffee. By that evening, I was sitting in my old truck, parked in front of the house that was no longer mine, surrounded by boxes of my own shirts and tools and a half-dead succulent she told me to take. It had felt ridiculous holding that little plant in my hands like it meant something. But I took it. It was all I had left that hadn't been itemized and split or claimed by the fine print. The apartment smelled like stale cigarettes and loneliness. It was the kind of place people ended up when they ran out of better options, and that's exactly what I had done. The floor creaked every time I shifted my weight, the paint peeled in the corners, and the heater made a sound like it was choking on its last breath. A single window looked out onto a brick wall tagged with graffiti that had faded into something abstract and unreadable. The kitchen, if you could call it that, had 2 cabinets, a cracked countertop, and a coffee maker with a shattered carafe. I didn't bother replacing it. My brother Jake offered me his spare room. Said I didn't have to deal with this kind of place. I thanked him and told him I needed space, which was only half the truth. What I needed was to feel something, even if it was just the cold draft leaking through the window at night or the ache in my back from the warped mattress. Being around people who pitied me, who'd ask questions, who'd mean well, was more than I could stomach. I threw myself into work like it was the last tether to who I used to be. The job site was loud, chaotic, and impersonal. It let me disappear into concrete and blueprints and shouted instructions. I didn't talk much, didn't joke like I used to, but I showed up early and stayed late. My boss, Rick, pulled me aside after a few days and told me I looked like hell. He said I should take time off, regroup, do whatever it was people did when their life collapsed. I told him I was fine. I wasn't, but I needed to believe I could be. Time off would mean sitting in that apartment alone, and that was worse than anything. Nights were the hardest. The quiet felt louder than the construction noise I'd left behind. I didn't have much furniture, a second-hand table, a fold-out chair, a lumpy bed, but on the counter sat the one thing I couldn't bring myself to throw away, a chipped ceramic mug that read, "Best Husband Ever." Claire gave it to me on our 10th anniversary, wrapped in tissue paper and paired with a handwritten note I couldn't bring myself to reread. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because some twisted part of me needed proof that it hadn't always been this way, or maybe I just wanted something to remind me that I hadn't imagined it all. Some nights I just sat there, holding that mug with nothing in it, staring at it like it might answer the question she never did. Did she stop loving me years ago? Was she planning this while we still shared takeout and laughed at reruns on the couch? I replayed every moment like a detective at a crime scene, looking for signs, missed cues, hidden meanings. It didn't help. The betrayal didn't make more sense the longer I stared. It just hardened into something heavy and familiar, like the smell of that apartment that wouldn't go away no matter how much I cleaned. I stopped bringing boxes in after the first week. What was the point? Everything I needed fit into 2 duffel bags, and everything else felt like clutter from a life that wasn't mine anymore. It was a cold, gray Thursday when Jake called, his voice quieter than usual, almost hesitant. He said something had come up, something about Mom's estate, a letter that was only now surfacing 3 years after she passed. I barely remembered the details of the will, just that everything had seemed straightforward back then. What could possibly be left? But his voice carried weight, and for once, it didn't sound like he was just checking in out of pity. He asked me to meet him downtown at a law office I didn't recognize. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity, partly because I had nothing else waiting for me in that apartment. The building was old but kept up, wood-paneled lobby, glass walls that made everything feel more serious than it probably needed to be. Jake was already there when I arrived, pacing near the receptionist's desk in a worn jacket. He gave me a nod, said nothing until we were inside the conference room. The lawyer, a thin man with silver glasses and a voice like radio static, introduced himself, then slid a thick envelope across the table. Alongside it, a small black debit card in an unmarked sleeve. "Your mother left specific instructions," he said, tapping the envelope gently, "to be opened precisely 3 years after her death, and only with both sons present." The paper felt heavier than it looked. I opened it slowly, unfolding the pages with fingers I hadn't realized were trembling. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, elegant, neat, the same loops and curves from birthday cards and lunchbox notes when we were kids. I read it aloud, my voice catching more than I wanted it to. She started with love, the kind that didn't need explaining. Then came the part that didn't make any sense. Our father, who we'd always known as a humble mechanic with oil-stained hands and a crooked grin, had been born into wealth. Real wealth. Marshall Manufacturing. A name I'd seen stamped into steel beams, industrial parts, even billboards along the interstate. I'd never made the connection. He was the eldest son of that empire, expected to take over the legacy, expand it, carry the name forward. But he walked away from it all, for love, for a quieter life, for Mom. Before he died, he had quietly created a trust using a portion of that inheritance. Something separate, something meant for us. Our mother had kept it hidden, respecting his wishes, protecting it until the right time. And that time, according to their plan, was now. The letter said it clearly. The funds were to remain untouched until we were both firmly into adulthood, past the impulsiveness of youth, and long enough removed from grief to see clearly. I, as the eldest, was named trustee. Jake looked at me like he'd just seen a ghost. The debit card, the lawyer explained, was just the key to access the trust account, pre-activated. The actual value wasn't stated in the letter, but judging by the way the lawyer straightened his tie and avoided eye contact, it wasn't a small number. I sat there in silence, the letter still in my hand, the weight of it sinking deeper than anything I'd felt in months. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Shock, gratitude, confusion, they all blurred into one numb pressure behind my eyes. My father, a man who had chosen oil over silver, left us something anyway. Not just money but trust. A plan. A message that we hadn't been forgotten, even if the world made it feel that way. The lobby of First Keystone Trust felt more like a private museum than a bank. Quiet, marble floors, thick glass doors and polished wood everywhere. No lines, no numbered tickets, just a quiet hum of air conditioning and the distant click of someone's heels across the floor. Jake and I sat on a leather couch that probably cost more than my entire apartment, the envelope from the lawyer still in my jacket pocket. The debit card rested in my wallet, like a loaded weapon I hadn't figured out how to carry yet. A woman in a navy blue suit called my name and led us to a private room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the skyline. She introduced herself as the senior account manager, shook my hand firmly, then asked for ID and the sealed documents we'd received. I handed them over in silence, still not quite convinced this wasn't all some mistake or cruel joke. She reviewed everything carefully, typing notes into her computer, then paused. "Mr. Marshall, before I proceed, I need verbal confirmation that you are aware you're the named trustee on this account, and that you're prepared to review its full contents today." I nodded once. My voice caught in my throat, so I forced out a simple, yes. She entered a final password, and then turned her monitor slightly toward me. On the screen, bold and unblinking, sat a number, $847,239,114.32. I stared at it without breathing. Jake leaned forward, squinting like maybe he hadn't seen it right. The woman looked between us and continued calmly, as if she had delivered this kind of news a dozen times before. She explained that the original trust had been ceded by our father shortly after his departure from the Marshall family estate, starting with a sizable share of his inheritance. Our mother, careful and methodical, added to it quietly over the years, nothing extravagant, just smart, steady contributions reinvested with precision. With compound interest and aggressive long-term investments, the balance had ballooned across 36 years into what now sat in front of us, nearly $1 billion. Neither of us spoke. My hand gripped the edge of the table to keep from floating out of my chair. My chest felt hollow and heavy all at once. Everything around me, the sterile bank room, the polished glass, the subtle scent of lemonwood polish, faded into static. The number stayed. 847 million. For a moment all I could think about was Claire. Claire and her father's smug lawyer, the papers, the house, the way she looked at me like I was disposable. She had taken what she thought was everything, our home, our shared accounts, our 15 years. She left me with nothing but a truck, a toolbox, and the broken pieces of a life she clearly thought had no value. And now here I sat, the trustee of a fortune so vast it didn't seem real. Jake exhaled sharply beside me. Is this actually ours? He asked the woman, his voice unsteady. She nodded once. Yes. It is entirely under your management, Mr. Marshall, she said, looking at me. The funds are liquid and accessible immediately. There are no stipulations remaining. The trust is yours. I didn't buy a mansion. Didn't lease a sports car or take a first-class vacation to announce my new life to the world. Instead, I bought a half-abandoned city block hidden behind a stretch of rusted fencing and caution tape. The lot had been a failed commercial development, left to rot when the last investor backed out mid-pandemic. I purchased it through a shell company with a bland, forgettable name, no ties to me, no red flags. Just another transfer among dozens of real estate deals filed every day. On paper it looked like a gamble. In reality, it was the first move in something I'd been waiting my whole life to do. I stayed on as the project manager, the same role I'd always played. Wore the same steel-toe boots, stained jeans, high-vis vest. The guys on site called me Marshall, same as they always had. They had no idea I owned the dirt they were standing on. That the contracts they were filling out, the permits we were filing, the trucks we were unloading, every nail, every beam, every slab of concrete was being paid for with money they couldn't imagine. I kept my head down, kept sweating beside them in the summer heat, still drove the same beat-up truck with a cracked dash and a broken air vent. But the blueprints weren't the ones we started with. I had them redrawn. Gone were the overpriced condos and boutique retail shells. In their place, affordable housing units with rent caps, solar panel roofing, green spaces with shaded playgrounds, wide sidewalks and native tree plantings. A full community center with job training rooms, free internet access, and a kitchen big enough to serve hot meals during holidays or emergencies. We added underground parking, EV charging stations, rooftop gardens. No one asked questions. They figured the new client was trying to score PR points or city grants. No one imagined the man eating lunch on a curb with drywall dust on his boots was footing the bill himself. Jake took a different route. He poured part of his share into scaling his HVAC company, new trucks, better benefits, training programs. He didn't quit or cash out either. Just worked smarter. He hired a few vets, gave second chances to guys with records. Told me once over beers that helping someone pay their rent felt better than any number in his bank account. We agreed early. No one needed to know about the money. Not friends, not distant relatives, not anyone who'd suddenly remember our names once word got out. Every day I walked the job site, clipboard in hand, shouting over drills and hammers. And every night, I went home to my small apartment, not out of habit but because I wasn't finished yet. This wasn't about revenge. This was about doing something that would outlive the bitterness. Something real. Something no one could take away. The invitation came printed on heavy cream cardstock, embossed in gold foil, elegant and impersonal. The gala was being held at the Langford, one of those marble-clad downtown towers with valet parking and a chandelier in every room. My seat was secured through the same shell corporation that owned the development project, buried in a list of benefactors that looked like a Fortune 500 roll call. $50,000 wired without a second thought. Not for status. Just for access. I didn't need to make a statement. I just needed to be there. The tux fit better than I expected. Tailored black wool, sharp lapels, polished shoes that hadn't touched a construction site. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Not because of the suit but because I wasn't carrying the weight anymore. Not the weight of loss, not the shame Claire tried to leave me with. Just a calm, level quiet that came from knowing who I really was, something no courtroom or betrayal could take. The ballroom shimmered with soft amber lighting, champagne flowing freely between tables dressed in white linen and silver. I nodded politely, made small talk with strangers, let the wine sit untouched at my place. Faces blurred. Voices folded into a low drone of polite laughter and practiced networking. And then I saw her. Claire walked in on Derek's arm. He wore money like cologne, slick black suit, tailored within an inch of its life, hair that probably took longer to style than hers. She looked the same. Maybe a little tighter around the eyes, maybe a little more brittle in posture. But still Claire. Confident. Calculated. Smiling for cameras, scanning the room for relevance. Her eyes found me as I moved near the bar. The moment stretched. Recognition, confusion, disbelief. I didn't smile. Didn't flinch. Just met her gaze even as she hesitated mid-step. She turned to Derek and whispered something with a forced smirk before walking over. Well, she said, her voice sugar-coated with sarcasm, I didn't realize the ticket prices had gotten so generous. They'll let anyone in these days, huh? Her eyes flicked down looking for cracks. I gave her none. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I watched her expression shift, just a flicker, a tremor behind the performance. She was expecting someone smaller, someone bitter, someone broken. Not this. Not me, standing straight in a tux that fit better than anything she'd ever bought me, quiet, unreadable, unbothered. She lingered for a second too long, then laughed softly to herself like she hadn't just stumbled. She turned back to Derek and drifted away, but her steps weren't as smooth now. She glanced over her shoulder once, just once. That flicker, that was enough. She was beginning to understand. She hadn't left a man behind. She'd walked away from something she never really saw. And now it was too far out of reach to reclaim. The invitation came by courier, hand-delivered in a crisp envelope with no return address. Inside was a single card bearing the name Gregory Ashford in embossed lettering, along with the address of a private club uptown. One of those places that required legacy membership and a dress code written in unwritten rules. I almost threw it out. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what the man who once told me I wasn't good enough for his daughter had to say now. The club was as pretentious as I remembered. Dark wood walls, deep leather chairs, servers that moved like ghosts. They led me to a private lounge where Gregory sat alone near the window, sipping scotch with the same smug posture he'd had the day he warned me flat out that Claire deserved someone more aligned with her future. He stood when he saw me, extended a hand I didn't take. I sat across from him without a word, letting the silence stretch. He opened with pleasantries I ignored, then cleared his throat and got to the point. Claire, he said, had been doing some reflecting. She'd seen me at the gala, heard things, connected dots. She knew about the trust now. Details had reached her through mutual acquaintances. I didn't bother asking who. She wanted to talk. More than that, she wanted a second chance. I watched his face as he said it, like this was some dignified, reasonable proposal and not a pathetic pitch wrapped in tailored politeness. He said she missed me, regretted how things ended, believed we could be stronger together. That her connections could help me navigate the world I was now a part of. I almost laughed out loud. Her father, this man, was sitting across from me, calmly offering his daughter like a business merger, like a pawn to be moved back onto the board if the terms were right. I leaned back in the chair, looked him dead in the eye and laughed. Not politely. Not softly. A real, bitter, disbelieving laugh. You kicked me down and watched, I said, voice low but firm. You stood by while your lawyers carved up my life and called it fair. And now, because the numbers changed, because the balance sheet looks different, you think I need Claire? Or you? He didn't answer. Just sat there, mouth tightening, that old superiority flickering into something closer to discomfort. I stood, straightened my jacket, and let the words fall without ceremony. I don't need your daughter. I don't need her social ladder, her curated friends, or whatever version of respectability you think she brings. I'd rather build something honest, something mine, than tie myself to the same people who only show up when the light turns green. I left him sitting there, glass still sweating on the table, eyes slightly narrowed, unsure whether to be insulted or embarrassed. I didn't care. The door closed behind me with a soft click and I didn't look back. I ignored every call. The number was hers, I knew it without needing to check. She didn't leave voicemails, just rang every few days like a clock that hadn't figured out it was no longer needed. I didn't block her. I didn't respond either. Whatever she thought she missed, whatever version of me she suddenly remembered wanting, it wasn't the man she walked away from. And it wasn't the man I became after. Instead, I drove out to the cemetery on a clear, quiet morning. The kind of morning she would have loved, cool breeze, clean sky, no noise but the wind moving through dry leaves. I hadn't been to my mother's grave since the funeral. Not because I didn't care, but because I hadn't known how to talk to her without falling apart. This time I came with words. The marker was simple, the way she wanted. Her name etched into stone that didn't need to impress anyone. Patricia Elaine Marshall. Beloved wife. Devoted mother. There were fresh flowers there. Jake must have come recently too. I stood for a long time just looking at it before I crouched down and let the silence wrap around me. Thank you, I said. Not just for the money she protected or the letter that changed everything, but for the years before that. For teaching me how to work with my hands, how to hold myself steady when everything else was shaking. For teaching me self-worth in a house that had nothing flashy but everything real. She never told me to chase wealth. She taught me how to build. How to stay grounded. She gave me the tools long before she gave me the trust. Jake and I named it the Patricia Marshall Foundation. It felt right. We didn't want headlines. We wanted impact. The mission was clear: education and job training for single mothers, the kind of women who worked twice as hard and still came up short. We funded childcare centers, partnered with local trade schools, paid for certifications, transportation, rent support. No handouts, just hand-built ladders. Real ones. The construction project was the first success. What had once been an abandoned block was now alive. Rows of affordable housing with clean lines and solar panels, a community center buzzing with kids, food drives, resume workshops. The neighborhood wasn't just improved. It was transformed. People smiled when they passed through. That meant more than numbers in an account ever could. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I stood near the back, not on the stage. It wasn't about me. Local leaders spoke, families clapped, kids ran around in new sneakers. And then I saw her. She was parked across the street in a black SUV with the engine still running. Windows down just enough for her eyes to be visible. Claire. Watching. She didn't step out. Didn't wave. Our eyes met for less than a second, but that was enough. No bitterness. No gloating. Just clarity. Then she drove off, disappearing into traffic like a name in a past chapter. I smiled. Not because I won something, but because I didn't lose myself. This life, these people, this purpose, I built it from the ground up. Not from revenge. From reinvention. And I wouldn't trade it for anything she thought she left behind.